Our next speaker, really, I'll have to say he sent me his resume and had 2 lines on it. That's a very confident man. That's a very confident man. And he's getting wired up back there now. And Jared, one thing that he's famous for is his famous book, White Identity. And I think Pat is sold out of them. And I wish we had some more, but I bet you he could find a way to get one to you. And also, he's the founder and the head of American Renaissance. And they're going to be having a big conference coming up right before the election. And I sure would like to go. I'm certainly, I know Ed and I talked about it, and I hope that there'll be others here that will consider the conference as well. And he's going to, I'm sure Jared will share with you what you need to do to get signed up for that conference. But I highly recommend it, and I highly recommend whatever he's going to talk about, because it'll be truth as well. So, Brother Jared, without further ado.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great joy and an honor to be here with all of you people, and especially so because I was here just last year and I've been invited back. I'd like to speak about tradition, specifically Southern tradition, and then shift into this whole question of closer to the mic? All right, I can move them closer. Is this more better? All right. All right. Yes, I'd like to talk about tradition, specifically Southern tradition, and then move into the question of secession for survival, which is the theme of this meeting. But I'd like to start with a story about a young man who is here with us today. His name is Henry Edwards, and he is the son of James Edwards, who was yesterday's speaker and, of course, one of our heroes. Well, I met Henry when I was here last year on this occasion, and when I first met him, I was delighted that he said sir to me, and he said sir to his father. And I noticed, though, as the conversation went on, he drifted into a little bit of yeah and yes when he was answering his father. And I said, Henry, whenever your father speaks to you, you should say, sir, yes, sir, no, sir. And when your mother speaks to you, you should say, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. And he answered, yes, sir. Now, I could not be too hard on young Henry, because when I was a little older than he is now, maybe 13, maybe 14, I remember asking my father, why do I always have to say sir to you? Why do I always have to say ma'am to mom? And he had a very quick answer. He said, that's the way my daddy taught me to speak, and that's the way his daddy taught him to speak, and his daddy taught him to speak, and that's the way we Taylors talk. Now, at the time, I found that explanation inadequate. I thought to myself, well, okay, maybe we've always done that, but does that mean we've always got to do that? Well, as I got older, I discovered why we do that. It's a way that we express our love and our admiration for our parents. And as I got older, I found that it was at first hard to say sir and ma'am, and then easy, and then delightful. And to my father's dying day, that's how I spoke to him. And so this reminds me of one of the observations of the great British conservative Edmund Burke. He wrote this, I am bold enough to confess that we are generally men of untaught feelings, that instead of casting away all our old prejudices, we cherish them. We cherish them because they are prejudices. And the longer they have lasted, the more we cherish them. We are afraid to put men to live, each on his own private stock of reason, because the stock in each man is small. You can't trust people to do what they might think is best. Our ancient prejudices and traditions are better. Now he goes on to say, things have come to a bad pass when people even begin to question the reasons for ancient prejudices, like the question I asked my father. But that when wise men analyze what's behind those prejudices, they find excellent reasons for them. And then Burke goes on to say this, and I think this is very interesting and very important. He says it's all very well to find these excellent reasons for our prejudices, but, and now I'll resume quoting, it is more wise to continue with the prejudice than the reason involved, better not to cast away the coat of prejudice and leave nothing but the naked reason, because prejudice renders a man's virtue his habit, not a series of reasoned decisions. Through durable prejudice, his duty becomes part of his nature. So what he's saying is, when we act according to our ancient traditions, we act according to our prejudices, we act instinctively and with conviction and without the dithering of reflection and reasoning. Tradition and prejudice are wisdom passed down to us from the ages of many generations, and we abandon them at our great peril. At the Constitutional Convention, John Dickinson warned, experience should be our only guide. Reason may mislead us. And reason certainly has misled us many, many times. Reason of sorts was behind the horrors of the French Revolution. Reason, to some degree, was behind every word Karl Marx thought he wrote. And all the catastrophes unleashed by Mao Zedong and Pol Pot were based in one way or another on their idea of reason. And reason has brought us really crazy ideas such as racial equality, and now one of the most spectacular examples of throwing away the wisdom and the guidance of history and experience, the idea that men can become women and women can become men. Now, we can all imagine preposterously foolish ideas. What is difficult to imagine is how they can have been propagated to the point that to oppose them is practically a crime. How can so many people believe, or at least pretend to believe, feel compelled to believe, things that are so utterly and obviously untrue? And so back to the whole question of Southern tradition. Not long ago, someone asked me, why am I pro-Confederate? Those are her very words, pro-Confederate. That's a little bit like asking me, why am I pro-me? The South is inseparable from who I am. I was born into this. It's like Burke's prejudices. The older our feelings of national pride, the more we cherish them. So there is a short answer to that question, is because I was born and reared that way. And that short answer would be enough for someone who has his or her own deep traditions. But a lot of people, especially these days, they do not have a real conviction or a deep tradition. And for those, just as the way I set to eventually figuring out why tailors have always called their parents sir and ma'am, I set my mind to trying to answer that question. And here is something of a longer version of why I am pro-Confederate. Well, I own a small brass plate. It's about this size. And it was made at the Kure Naval Arsenal in Japan in 1909. And it was attached to a 14-inch naval gun that was mounted on a battleship. and it bears the date and the manufacturing number of that great naval gun. I'm very fond of that brass plate. After the war, the American Navy scrapped or scuttled almost every surviving Japanese warship. So that plaque is a very rare surviving piece of the Imperial Japanese Navy. At the beginning of the war, it was the finest Navy in the world. And if you doubt that, read about the Battle of Savo Island against the US Navy, and you can read about the sinking of the Repulse and the Prince of Wales. I admire men who fight and die for their country, even if they died fighting our people. Men who do their duty even unto death, they are for me the finest examples of manhood. And almost all nations have great victories achieved by men who did their duty even unto death. The French at Austerlitz, the British at Trafalgar, the Germans who defeated the combined armies of France, Britain, the Netherlands, Belgium in just 6 weeks at the time of the Battle of France. And I admire the losers of those battles as well, to the extent that they fought bravely and loyally, as most of them did. And so, of course, we revere our Confederate ancestors who fought bravely and loyally for 4 hard years and did their duty unto death. And so much as I may admire the sailors of the Imperial Japanese Navy or the men who fought for Napoleon, brave and loyal though they are, the Confederates were our own people, our flesh and blood, all Southerners. We have this all Southerners have this great privilege in common. We have the blood of this special group of heroes in our veins and in ours alone. Our ancestors were not just brave and loyal. They were, I believe, objectively finer men than their adversaries. Perhaps finer men than most any who have ever taken the field. Certainly its best leaders were. And their example was an inspiration to all the men who served under them. Their example was an inspiration to many who just watched from the sidelines. Sir Garnet Wolseley was a British officer who rose to the rank of Field Marshal, the highest rank in the entire British Army. And he spent 2.5 years observing the battles. And he got to know many of the commanders. And he wrote this: "The history of both armies abounds in gallant and chivalrous deeds done by men who fought for their respective convictions and from a sincere love of country." But listen to what he wrote, this foreigner, this British man, what he wrote about Robert E. Lee. "I have met many of the great men of my time, but Lee alone impressed me with the feeling that I was in the presence of a man who was cast in a grander mold and made of different and finer metal than all other men, a man with whom none I ever knew was worthy to be classed." And I would ask you this: how often do men, eminent in their own right, ever speak so reverently of a living contemporary? Sir Garnet also knew Stonewall Jackson. And 30 years after the war, he wrote this: "With that innate love of virtue and real worth which has always distinguished the American people," imagine writing that about Americans today. "With that innate love of virtue and real worth which has always distinguished the American people, there has long been growing up, even among those who were the fiercest foes of the South, a feeling of love and reverence for the memory of this great and true-hearted man of war, who fell in what he firmly believed to be a sacred cause. The fame of Stonewall Jackson is no longer the exclusive property of Virginia or the South. It has become the birthright of every man privileged to call himself an American." Boy, how the United States has changed. There was another foreigner, British Colonel George Henderson. He wrote a 2-volume biography of Stonewall Jackson. And he held Stonewall Jackson up as an inspiration to all English-speaking white men everywhere. He wrote this of Jackson: "In whatever fashion his own countrymen may deal with the problems of the future, the story of Stonewall Jackson will tell them in what spirit they should be faced." The spirit of Stonewall Jackson should tell us in what spirit we should face problems of the future. He goes on to say, "Nor has that story a message for America alone. The hero who lies buried at Lexington belongs to a race that is not confined to a single continent. And to those who speak the same tongue and in whose veins the same blood flows, his words come home like an echo of all that is noblest in our history. What is life without honor?" That, to Colonel Henderson, was Stonewall Jackson's message to all English-speaking white people. What is life without honor? And of course, there were Yanks who saw the greatness of our ancestors. There are many examples. I'll give you just one. January 19th, 1907 would have been Robert E. Lee's 100th birthday. And on that day, Charles Francis Adams spoke in Robert E. Lee's memory. Now, who was Charles Francis Adams? He was the son of President John Quincy Adams, the grandson of President John Adams, a Massachusetts boy. And Charles Francis Adams was by no means a friend of the Confederacy. During the war, he was the Yankee envoy to Britain, and he almost single-handedly kept Britain from recognizing the Confederacy. And yet, speaking of Lee, in Lee's home state, he said, "Virginians, whom shall we set apart as one of our sacred men? Him you will set on a high column, that all men looking at him may be continually apprised of the duty you expect from them." So here's a former enemy, a Massachusetts boy. He saw what an inspiring model of manhood General Lee was. And indeed, all across the South, as you know, Lee was set on many high columns. That was an era, 1907, in which serious men, North and South, recognized true greatness. And it was an era in which serious men asked, "Whom shall we consecrate and set on a high column?" They took grammar seriously in those days, too. Now, what does Charles Francis Adams' question say about the country we have become? Whom shall we consecrate and set on a high column? First of all, we haven't set anyone on a high column in over 100 years. The nation that honored its great men that way is gone. All we ever do is take men down from high columns. But if we no longer honor our heroes that way, how is it that we set up examples to inspire the young? Well, I'll tell you how we do that. Just go to a bookstore and go to the children's section and see who the biographies are about. And I will tell you who the models of youth today are in the children's section of the bookstore. You'll find Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You'll find Rosa Parks. You'll find Jackie Robinson. You can find children's biographies of Hillary Clinton and Cesar Chavez and Oprah Winfrey. Do you have any idea how many children's biographies there are of Oprah Winfrey? How many different children's biographies? There are about 40. That is how America today puts someone on a high column. And this number of 40 children's biographies of Oprah Winfrey, that alone is proof that everyone in this room is an utter stranger in his own land. And I don't need to tell you about how fashionable it is, especially to despise our Southern heroes. And of course, despising Confederates is just the first step. Today, all you need to know about Columbus is that he committed genocide. The founders were wicked slaveholders. Even the statue of Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C. had to be protected by a high chain link fence because the great emancipator was just another no-good white man. So Jamestown, the Revolution, the conquest of the continent, becoming a great power, all of these things we used to be proud of, they are now crimes against humanity. Well, how do you solve a problem like this? I started my publication, American Renaissance, in 1990, 34 years ago. At that time, I thought the United States could be set back on track. Not anymore. And as Brother Tommy said in his remarks earlier today, I've watched the United States degenerate all my life. It's no longer my country and it can't be saved. I do not believe that it can ever again become a home for white people. Now, any lefty who heard me say this would start braying about white privilege and then essentially end up saying, yeah, we're lucky we don't have all your throats slit. That is their attitude. Can any of you think of a realistic way to take America back, as the Republicans keep saying? If you can think of a way, please let me know. And so in the long run, it doesn't matter who's elected president this year, or 4 years from now, or 40 years from now. Now certainly, elections can slow the rot, and I will certainly vote. But the rot will not be hacked out and made good with seasoned timbers. America is finished. We cannot take the whole country back. We have to settle for something else. Psychologically, we already live in a different country from Kamala Harris or Michelle Obama or Ibram Kendi or Joy Reid. And then, of course, there are the sick whites who join in the physical and psychological pillaging of our country. They remind me of Samuel Adams's words, the colonists who preferred to submit to England rather than fight for sovereignty. He said to them, "If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude than the animating contest of freedom, then go from us in peace. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen." So many Americans crouch and lick hands. I'm sure many of you remember that in 2020, Nancy Pelosi and Charles Schumer and other Democrats knelt on the marble floor of the Capitol for 9 minutes to honor George Floyd. And for now, those people will enjoy greater wealth if they crouch and lick hands. And these aren't even hands that feed them. These are hands of people who resent them and even hate them. Now, the ancient Hebrews, they dressed in sackcloth and ashes when they wanted to cover themselves in shame and degradation in public. Well, Nancy Pelosi and Charles Schumer wore kente cloth. We can't share a country with people like that. We may have the same passport as these people, but we could not be more dissimilar. Let's make it official. Let us part amicably and go our own way. In marriage, it's called irreconcilable differences. We tried living together and it didn't work, and we need a divorce. And shouldn't these people be happy to see us go? Shouldn't they be delighted? For some reason, they seem to think that would just be an awful thing. I think frankly, they would rather see us dead than let us go our own way and build a new confederation dedicated to our culture, our heritage, and dedicated to the destiny of Europe. Whether I live to see it or not, I believe there will be an ingathering of our people on this continent, and we will build a new home. A new home in North America for us and for our civilization. We need secession in order to survive. Let me put it as bluntly as possible. White people deserve to live in a country that does not tell them they are dirt. Is that too much to ask? No. It's something every people, everywhere deserves. But it will not happen in the current United States of America. Our people, Northerners and Southerners alike, must live in a nation that honors our traditions, fulfills our destiny, a nation capable of producing great men like Washington and Lee, a nation that sets truly great men on high columns and inspires its children to be even greater still. This, ladies and gentlemen, we can do. And if we are the fit children of our noble sires, this we will do. Thank you.